reversing along here. We're looking at the Federalist Papers. We've looked at the advantages of the Union, the disadvantages of the existing government, of course, the introduction before that. And then the other day, we were looking at the common defense and powers of taxation. So I'm going to take the foot off the gas a little bit here. Today, we're just going to be looking at the difficulties in framing the Constitution as well as the general powers. And then after that is the structure. You've got the four entities. You've got the House, you've got the Senate, you've got the executive, and you've got the judiciary, right? And we'll pretty much finish up on those four entities. Okay, you can see down here. We've got after the judiciary conclusion. So, and again, just as a reminder, I'm not a constitutional expert. I am not a constitutional lawyer. I am not a constitutional professor, political science professor. You don't have to be. This is stuff just like economics, stuff that everybody can know and should know and needs to know and should be required to know. It shouldn't be able to graduate from high school unless they know. Okay, why? Well, it's the law of the land. It's the very water within which we swim. Do you want to know why things cost a little bit more? Well, it's the economy and the laws within that allow us. And Congress is in control of the purse strings. They're in control of borrowing money. Okay, and if they borrow too much money, especially too much money too quickly, inflation, hyperinflation, we've got those problems right now. All right, we need to stop spending. We need to cut the spending. We need to do it now. We need to do it quickly. And believe it or not, it's a relatively short cure. We're not talking decades of time, but if we do it right, if we pull in the reins on the borrowing, spending, and get the revenue above the spending or the debt, building of the debt, then we can begin to pay off that debt relatively quickly, right? That's key, that's important, that's huge, okay? So how about framing the Constitution? Chapter 37. It was a sad commentary on human affairs that public measures can rarely be investigated with a spirit of moderation. Pause, think. Is that true? That was true over 200 years ago, right? 1776, 1876, 1976, 2076. It was a sad commentary, let's slow it down, on human affairs that public measures can rarely be investigated with a spirit of moderation, said Madison. Is that spirit of moderation invoked at this time when looking at public affairs? Who then proceeded to take critics of the Constitution sharply to task. Some critics were well-intentioned, others were not. Still others were stubborn or ignorant or both. Things never change. Things never change. Another thing is people just think that, the country happened, the revolution happened, the Constitution happened, and that it just, no problems, no contentions, no altercations, no difficulties, and then things went smoothly. Of course, because people don't know, they don't know, they don't think, people don't think, and that's a common problem. Before the American Revolution, there were basically three groups. We want it, we don't want it, we don't know. Fence sitters, right? And it took some time. And it was a scary proposition. If you were in control, being controlled by I'm going to say a foreign government, right? It was the British controlling the colonies, pretty foreign, right? And a lot of just look at the Declaration of Independence. We should take a look at that as well. Declaration of Independence is a great argumentative essay. And it looks at about maybe roughly 30 grievances. And among those grievances were not being able to vote in your own governors, having standing armies, meeting in places far and distant to vote and to make political changes and to have meetings and so forth and so on, right? So there was a lot of problems. The colonists were being handcuffed time and time again. And eventually things like the Boston Massacre occurred. And that was standing army soldiers in the town square. And they were just standing there pretty much. And the colonists had to have enough. They've had enough and started throwing snowballs. And some of those snowballs had stones in them. Of course, what good snowball doesn't have stones in them, right? And the soldiers got a little nervous and shot back into the crowd, killed 6 people, right? And so the tensions were rising. If you're constantly trying to, you can think about this on a small, medium, large size scale, doesn't matter. If you're constantly working to suppress people's freedoms and people's basic desires, whether you're a parent or a teacher or a politician or a mayor or a governor or a dictator or a king or whomever, people are people. Whenever you attempt to oppress people, eventually something's going to give. Eventually, might take some time, but eventually, right? Delegates who had just recently met at Philadelphia in the Constitutional Convention had set themselves the goal of designing an institutional framework that would allow a strong central government ample power. That phrase alone, strong central government, ample power, right, to perform its tasks. This is a problem. That was one of the great problems. You need a strong central government in order to get things done, in order to collect debts, in order to raise armies, in order to fully functionize commerce, right, between the states. So you do need a strong central government. This is something that the founding fathers and the early Americans found out after the weak government that they had initially, right? So that's an important phrase to remember, right? Strong central government, ample power to perform its tasks, while still paying due attention to liberty and the Republican form, 2 elements, as Madison noted, always difficult to mix in the right proportions. This is the key point here, right? And that's where the greatest difficulties come in. Having a strong central government that can do what it's supposed to do, but also make sure that it doesn't overstep its bounds and doesn't infringe upon the rights of individuals to their rights to their life, liberty, pursue happiness, property, right? But we just meditate on that for quite some time and talk about that for quite some time. But that's huge, right? That's big. The convention had to start from scratch, having no good example to follow. So in some ways, the convention, the Constitution was new, right? You had the Articles of Confederation, you had precedences that had been set by other countries in current times and in past times and other cultures, right? Greek and Roman cultures all the way up to modern times at that time, which was the British, right? And the British ruled. But still, first time with a great democratic experiment. And I don't want to hear people say, oh, it's not a democracy. I've talked about this before. It is a democracy. The basic philosophy behind the United States is the rule of the people. People are sovereign. Rule of the people, by the people, for the people. But we have a representative, I guess you could say a representative democracy, right? Constitutional republic. And our representatives in the House and the state and the Senate and the presidency, right? Maybe even in the judiciary, even though those judges are assigned for life by the executive. We don't have much to do with that. But anyways, you get the point, right? So it is a democracy in which the people rule, but it's not just the people ruling. If it was just a plain democracy, that would be massively problematic. How do you get 330 people to make decisions all the time? about every little problem that comes up, political, social, otherwise, right? You can't do it, just can't do it. The logistics of it is insane. You think government's slow? Put 330 million people in power, right? So it's not politically, it's not a democracy. Philosophically, the people rule, they're sovereign, it's a democracy for the people, by the people, of the people. True, yes. But how the government functions is through constitutional republic. Constitution is the law of the lands, republic is federal and state, where the states are supreme because the states are the people. Let's get all that down, right? Let's get all that down. And time again, I've seen people on the internet get all upset. It's not a democracy. Read a book, wise up, get smart, know your stuff. Well, it is a democracy. And I have to say, sometimes I correct it. A lot of times, I don't have the time or the wherewithal or the desire to constantly, excuse me, correct people when they make those mistakes, right? Anyways, start from scratch. Many different views have been represented at the convention, true, in the debates. And this is democracy. Debates, conventions, problems, compromising, debates, conferences, conventions, compromising, debates, conventions, compromising, right? Not just my way or the highway. Not if you don't believe what I believe, you're evil. You're Satan incarnate, Hitler, right? I don't know of any president who was ever even remotely close to Hitler in philosophy or in actions. Yet nevertheless, the press loves to wing that word around, and it's so irresponsible and stupid. Yet people buy into it. Many in the general public buy into it. Don't be as dumb as the media. And the media knows what it's doing, okay? They're not really that dumb. They know what they're doing, right? You ever hear of there's a particular psychology of repetition, right? If you want people to believe something, that's gaslighting. Just keep saying it, saying it, saying it, saying it over and over and over again. And the thing is, most people don't think. They don't think very much. And if they keep hearing people, especially important sources or those in power, saying the same thing over and over and over again, and where's our most important, what are our most important sources or biggest sources of communication? Sure, mainstream media, social media, you got Hollywood, and you've got our education system. Those are the main avenues through which messages come into the people, right? So be very leery of what that message is. Even though there may be a consensus, let me say it again, there may be a consensus in that message. It's not necessarily right. And I've said this before. At one time, it was felt that minorities were all inferior, that women were inferior, that slavery was okay, blah, 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 blah. Do you understand what I'm saying? Be very, 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 in order to be a good critical thinker, you have to think very independently, think very disciplined, think very well, be patient. There's a lot to take in. It took me months, years to understand this stuff. Very long time. Because there's oh so much going on. So many voices vying for attention, some louder than other, and sometimes the loudest voices are not the most honest voices. I'm just saying. I'm not saying one way or the other about anything in particular. I'm just saying in general, and it's up to you. It's up to you, the individual, and I stay out of it. You have to make the decisions for yourself, right? That's America. That's freedom, right? But as soon as you start gaslighting people, as soon as you start dictating to people, as soon as you try to use certain psychologies to get people to believe things, no matter how wrong and untrue and disinforming they are, that's evil. That's pure evil right there. Then there, that stuff going on, them there, right there. That's them evil stuff, right? In the debates, there had been many spirited contentions between the large states and the small states, true, between the several geographical sections of the country, between rural interests and urban interests, between creditors and debtors. It had been necessary to adjust and accommodate all major interests and views, right? So how do you do that? Well, one of the ways that you do that is through the electoral college. If you had just had the general populations, the general population, I should say, vote, right? All the large population areas would win. Not all the little cities and towns and states would just be ignored, right? They would have no voice, and that's not very nice. That's dictatorial. That's fascist, right? So you allow a voice, right? And because of the electoral college and the way it's set up, politicians can't just go to where there's the largest number of people. You know, they don't just politic in what are the largest states? California, Texas, Florida, and New York, right? And I think 3 of those happen to be of one particular party. So guess who would be winning all the time if that's the way things were set up, right? So, I mean, because those states are very large, they have a lot of electoral votes, right? You get a lot of electoral votes when you win those states. California is the biggest, right? Texas, New York, and Florida. You know, and that I think in that order. So, but you're not going to win the presidency. You need 270. So you got to keep going. And what does that mean? That means now I have to talk to the little states and all the people out there, right? And all the concerns have to be addressed, right? And that's pretty smart. That's pretty smart the way. And people want to get rid of the electoral college. Just go with the popular vote. No, that would be insane. That would just destroy liberties and freedom of speech and participation in your government. So many people would just be ignored. Is that what you want? Big states are going, yeah, sure, I don't care. But majority of this country is not big states, right? Of course, said Madison, the Constitution was not perfect. Bingo, obviously. But instead of being criticized, it should be praised and supported for being as good as it was under the circumstances. Besides, provisions had been made for amending it to make it better. There you go. Once it was adopted, which should be at once. So that's why you have your amendments. There's 27 of them, and eventually we're going to go over those as well. There have been hundreds, if not thousands, of amendments proposed over the years, but only 27 have stuck. Why? Because such an important document as the Constitution should not be changed for light and transient reasons. Chapter 38, America was like a man who finds his illness growing steadily worse and calls in doctors. I like that one. After examinations and consultations, doctors agreed on what should be done in an increasingly dangerous situation. As soon as some of the patient's friends hear of this, they come in and without any knowledge of medicine, I like that, warn the sick man that the doctor's prescription will poison his constitution and probably cause his death. That's great. I once heard Milton Friedman talking about some aspect of constitutional law, and it had to do with, and somebody was trying to prove their point, and they yelled out, "But you didn't grow up poor." And I can't remember what the issue was, but it had something to do, obviously, with money and poverty. And they're thinking, you know, he's a college highfalutin, high-end college professor, you know, so he must be one of the elites, right? But he grew up poor, and he said, "I grew up more poor than probably the majority of you in this room," and it was at a big lecture hall, you know. And he says, do you think that one who grew up poor has better insight than one who grew up wealthy? Should a doctor only perform on someone with cancer if he or she has had cancer? Oh, that was great. That's great. I love that one. He was ready for that question. Probably had it many times before. America was sensible of her malady, sickness, and it called for advice from knowledgeable men of his choice. Yet this advice was being challenged and rejected by some. Madison then briefly considered the main objections to the proposed constitution. Some did not want it because it was not a confederation of states, but a government of individuals. Interesting, interesting. Others agree that it should be a government over individuals, but not to the extent proposed. There were those disturbed because the Constitution did not have a certain Bill of Rights, which eventually was put in, right? This was a chief objection of the anti-federalists. So the anti-federalists, I don't know, I think I might have been, a lot of times I agree with them because they're worried about too strong of a central government, which would take away from the power of the people or the individuals, right? A legitimate objection soon removed by passage of the first 10 amendments, since known as our National Bill of Rights. As I said, we'll go over that. It was based on Virginia's celebrated Declaration of Rights, drafted almost wholly by the great George Mason, a determined anti-federalist. Having listed other objections raised against the proposed constitution, Madison asked critics to consider what kind of government they had had before. It was not necessary that the proposed constitution be perfect. What I say, like in learning this stuff, you don't have to know this stuff inside and out and thoroughly. You can pick up bits and pieces as you move along, but you definitely want to know the Constitution, the law of the land. You want to know the basics there. You want to know the basics in economics so that you can make good financial decisions. You can make good political decisions. You can make good decisions at the local community level, state level, federal level. So you know this stuff so that you know your rights, you know what the government can and cannot do in taking rights or giving you rights, removing or giving rights. You'll also know what the government can and cannot do with your money, with your freedom of movement, with your ability to earn money, to make money, to save money, to invest money, to not have to spend too much money to buy stuff because of inflation and poor government planning and too much spending in your government, right? So much to know, so important to know, right? Not knowing this stuff, not knowing the Constitution, basics of the Constitution, not knowing the economic basics is kind of like being a fish and somebody walks up to the fish or swims up to the fish and says, "Hey fish, what are you swimming in?" Swimming? What's that? Oh, it's what you're doing, moving around. What are you moving around in? I don't know. What are you talking about? What's that stuff? This stuff, all this stuff around us. What do you call that? I don't know. What do you call all this stuff around us? These laws, these financial principles. And most people will be like, oh, I don't know. Sorry, I had a call. Where was it? An energetic government under the new constitution could help greatly in speeding the development of Western frontier country, a mine of vast wealth of the United States, a rich and fertile country of an area equal to the inhabited extent of the United States, out of which could be cut a number of new states, right? So a lot of growth opportunity. In chapter 39, the first question Madison offers here is whether the new national government would be strictly Republican in form. No other form would be compatible with the genius of the people of America, with the fundamental principles of the revolution, right? Again, the republic is broken up into Central government, that's Washington, right? Federal government and state governments, right? Where the people are sovereign, the people are in charge, large and in charge. And the interesting thing is in the Constitution, if we don't like what is going on in Washington, and this has very rarely occurred, but if we don't like what's going on in Washington, we can ignore them and just vote by state, in some policy or law, just to some effect. Again, I don't want to jump ahead, but we'll get into that. That's coming. Madison defined a republic as a government deriving all its powers from the great body of the people. There you go. And administered by persons holding office during the people's pleasure for a limited period during good behavior, right? Good behavior, right? So that's what it is. It's of the people, by the people, for the people. The people are sovereign, but they're not going to be doing the hands-on governing. They're going to elect people to represent them at the community level and also at the state level and at the federal level, right? In the House and the Senate and also the executive. Those individuals are going to represent the people, the will of the people. And this is why you need senators and representatives from each state. Because if the people that you elected from your state are not doing what you want them to do for your state or in general, and even if it's just your state, you can fire them, hire a new group every election cycle, right? Isn't that great? So we're in charge. Ultimately, we're in charge. The government under the proposed constitution answered that description. The House of Representatives was to be elected immediately by the people, the Senate and the president indirectly by the people, right? So once again, the House of Representatives, the House is really the House of the people, right? Even the judges, along with other important national officers, were to be the choice through a remote choice of the people themselves. Yeah. So the judges, you're not electing the judges directly, but you're electing individuals such as the president of the United States who will assign judges, right? Pick judges. Many objected that the new government would not be federal in form based on the sovereignty of the states, right? Talked about that, but rather a national government based on a consolidation of the states. Madison analyzed this objective at length, arguing that the new government would be at once a federal and national government, federal in most respects, but necessarily national in others. Okay, true. But most of the most important decisions for individuals in the states would be done at the state level by their governor and governor representative, the local representatives and state representatives, right? Chapter 40 had the Constitutional Convention at Philadelphia been authorized to frame and propose this mixed constitution? Anti-Federalists said no. As expressed in a resolution by the Continental Congress, the convention had been called for the sole and express purpose of revising the Articles of Confederation, and the Articles of Confederation, instead of being revised, had been entirely scrapped. After arguing around this point in considerable length, Madison finally admitted that the delegates at the Constitutional Convention had exceeded their instructions, but were justified in doing so. Seeking to establish a more adequate central government, they had found that no mere revision of the Articles of Confederation would do. The foundation of the American government had to be changed, right? True. So, and people talk now about changing the Constitution, getting rid of it, rewriting it. It's all blah, 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 blah. Yeah, but it's working. And I've told you several times, there's evidence that it's working. And I've given you that evidence on several occasions, right? People voting with their feet, more people coming here than ever before. The dollar is the world's monetary base unit, right? English is used around the world. It's used in newspapers. It's used in air traffic controller towers. It's used in programming languages throughout the world. So people look to something that is doing well. Who's the great example? So when people are looking to you, and they nod, or they walk in your direction, or they come to your doorstep, or they ask to join your country, you know something's working well. More people coming here, again, as I said before, legally and illegally, than any other country in the world. If you don't believe me, look it up. You think people are dying to get into Central South America, Europe, even Africa, Middle East, China, North Korea, Vietnam, Colombia, Asia? Where are the people going? Kind of answers the question, doesn't it? I got nothing to say. I don't have to answer the question. I'm just giving you information, facts. Hopefully that's good critical thinking, right? Even if the drafting of a whole new constitution was unauthorized, said Madison, did it follow that the constitution ought for that reason alone be rejected? If it be lawful to accept good advice even from an enemy, shall we set the ignoble example of refusing such advice even when it is offered by our friends in the form of a new constitution calculated to accomplish the views and happiness of the people of America? Life, liberty, there's your happiness, right? Life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. In the final analysis, very little need to be said here. Madison shared Washington and Hamilton's view that the proposed constitution, though not perfect, was the best that could be hoped for under the circumstances, and that provision had been made for means of amending it as faults appeared and necessity required, and also as the country grew and as time passed, requirements and needs change, so the amendments come forth, or new laws can be written up by the Senate, and those laws, after being in place for a while, if things change, the federal level, the federal courts, right, Supreme Court, can make decisions as the country moves forward. Roe versus Wade, it's in the states, it's at the federal level, and then it goes back to the states. So things are in flux. Why? Because needs change, desires, priorities change of the people, right? Is this all sinking in? Slowly but surely. Stop calling me Shirley. It was a concession on Madison's part that he finally admitted that the delegates to the Constitutional Convention had violated their instructions, that they were merely to revise the Articles of Confederation. Instead, they had entirely scrapped them. Madison justified this in the name of the higher good. Nice. All right, let's do general powers, and then we'll call it a day. Okay, general powers. In chapter 41, the proposed constitution should be considered from several general points of view. The first concern the extent of power to be vested in government. So this, again, this is important. This is biggie. In previous essays, Publius had already shown, said Madison, that extensive powers for the national government were necessary means of attaining a necessary end. Critics kept contending that such extensive powers were too broad, unnecessary, inconvenient, and liable to abuse. Madison denied this, and this is the problem. And you got to be very careful. You do want a strong central government because you want to be able to have that government protect you, provide for you, ensure that the country is financially stable, control the purse strings, keep the money coming in, keep the economy going. You want to also make sure that trade within the states, nationally and internationally, is running smoothly, and a strong central government helps there. You want to be able to defend yourself on the seas and on the borders and on the lands and in the foreign countries and so forth. So there's so much that relies upon a strong central government, but at the same time, people are concerned because look where they were coming from. They were coming from a dictatorship. They were coming from a monarchy, a king, who controlled everything. One individual, one person, one power, power within that individual. And that has a tendency to be abused. And the Irish can tell you how abused they were under the British Crown, and also the Scots, right? And my father's Irish. So my family probably could tell you a lot of stories. Certainly, the national government should have unlimited power to raise armies and equip fleets for self-defense. Madison repeated Hamilton's argument that the country was so situated that a large standing army, an institution always dangerous to popular liberties, would not be necessary, so that the nation would not be crushed between standing armies and perpetual taxes. The power of regulating and calling from forth the militia had already been sufficiently vindicated and explained. Yeah. So one of the problems that the British Crown had is that they overextended themselves financially. They were ruling behind the barrel of the gun. They did it for 300 years. But eventually that just became too expensive, too exhausting. You know, being in North Africa, being in India, attempting to colonize the United States, and around a good portion of the rest of the world, Britain had its hands in a lot of countries, the controlling of a lot of countries, right? So that's hard to do. That's hard to maintain. It was also necessary the national government have unlimited power in levying and borrowing money. As I said, explained before, the government's revenue raising power should not be restricted to external taxes only, as many critics contended, right? Your duties, right? In chapter 42, the second general view of the proposed constitution should consider the government's power to regulate relations with foreign nations, that is, to make treaties, to send and receive ambassadors and lesser diplomatic officers, to punish piracy and other felonies on the high seas, remember? To the shores of Tripoli, you know, and the Barbary pirates. Regulate foreign commerce, including a power to prohibit the importation of slaves after the year of 1808, and to lay an intermediate duty of $10 per head as discouragement to such importations. It would have been well, said Madison, if the proposed constitution had ordered an immediate stop to the slave trade instead of putting it off until 1808, and that's what went on. The slave issue was an issue at the time the Constitution was being written, but it was felt that they needed the Constitution right then and there, and that taking care of the slave issue would take too long, and it would bog down having a Constitution, which was needed for many reasons mentioned and others. So, you know, eventually the slave issue was to be addressed and slavery to be abolished, right? But that would take some time. And at the time, the country needed to get out of debt. It needed to protect itself. It needed to get going financially and so forth and so on, right? And, you know, waiting until the slave issue could be finished and taken care of, it would just take too long, right? So that would be continued, worked on as time passed, right? Even so, it was a great point gained in favor of humanity that a period of 20 years was terminate forever a traffic, which has so long and so loudly upbraided barbarism modern policy. And that in the interim, the government would considerably discourage that traffic. Some critics, Madison noted, were attempting to pervert this provision into an objection against the Constitution by representing it on the one hand as criminal toleration of an illicit practice, right? So that's why I think people say that the Constitution is racist, even though that issue was eventually addressed, right? And on the other, as calculated to prevent voluntary and beneficial immigrations from Europe to America. Such misinterpretations deserve no answer. Now, if you're interested in more about the slavery issue, I would suggest that you listen to Thomas Sowell. Amazing insights, and I've mentioned him before in regards to economics. He was an economist, but also understood social issues, looked at numbers, very practical, data-based, research-based professor, thinker. critical thinker, analyst, wasn't just feeling things or imagining things or hoping things. He was using hard data to come up with understandings and insights and solutions, potential solutions, right? A third classification of the powers to be exercised by the proposed government came under the head of its authority to regulate commerce among the states and with Indian tribes, coin money, regulate its value and that of the foreign currencies, provide for the punishment of counterfeiting, establish a standard of weights and means, set up uniform rules for naturalization and bankruptcy, prescribe the manner in which all public records should be kept, and establish post offices, post roads. So this is pretty good. This is another important paragraph that I need to start pulling out these very summarian or summarizing paragraphs, lists of things, right? Important lists that help us to see why, right? Why was the Constitution written? Why was it that the Articles of Confederation weren't going to work, right? And what were the problems therein? And there's a whole list, like a Madison's, what is it, 2021? I got to go back in there. And this is also a nice list. And as I said, whenever you're learning something, you don't just say, well, there were problems and stuff, you know. Well, there were problems, and the problems were specifically, you know, and if you got a list, and if you memorize that list and think that list through, you'll know more accurately, you'll be able to think more accurately, precisely, concisely, thoroughly, vigorously, logically, comprehensively, right? It's all good, as the kids say. As to the power of regulating commerce among the states and the prohibition that the states were not to erect tariff barriers against one another. See, that was a problem. This free interstate commerce would correct many inequities. Yeah, see. So they wanted unencumbered free trade. When you hear about free trade, you often think about internationally with foreign countries, but free trade wasn't always something even within the United States, right? They had tariff barriers and some states doing dumb things one to another, right? So free interstate commerce would correct many inequities. Certain commercial states could no longer levy tributes on others. How about that? Yeah, it used to be banned. This is before the Constitution, right? And what is it? The fourth act, I think, is about the states and how the states interact one with another in regards to commerce, trade, and so forth. So that's in the Constitution, right? The Indian trade could be regulated better by the national government than by the individual states whose practices varied. See? So you need something that's unified. The more complexity that you add to something, the more it bogs things down, slows things down, makes it less efficient. Great deficiencies begin to crop up, right? I know. I used to work as a computer programmer. And the best situations occurred when you got rid of a lot of the junk and simplified it and streamlined it, right? So that philosophy works in micro and macro scenarios. Micro is small, maybe with little computer programs or a system, and macro would be larger, such as dealing with the states. The same was true of the rules of naturalization for which the states had set varying and often conflicting standards. Chapter 43, Madison listed 9 powers, which he labeled miscellaneous, the first on Madison's list. And one of the most interesting was the power to promote the progress of science and useful arts, right? You see that done, you see it on occasion. You'll see the president sitting, last time I remember it was, I watched, what was it? They were honoring Led Zeppelin. That's my band. I'm sorry, I'm an old head, right? And Obama was there, and Michelle, and they were watching all these performers come forth and honor Led Zeppelin. So yeah, the sciences and arts have to be encouraged and appreciated and promoted, right? Library of Congress. I have several documents in the Library of Congress as I've been published on occasion. By securing for a limited time to authors and inventors the exclusive right to their respective writings and discoveries. Madison noted that the copyright of authors had long been judged to be the right under common law in Britain. Such copyrights or patents should be extended to protect and encourage inventors. And that's why they have the Library of Congress. And that's why my copyright is in there. Not that I'm any big thing, but as an American citizen, we all have the right to do that, right? Another powers would be the national government's right to exclusive legislation over lands purchased from the states for the erection of forts, arsenals, dockyards, and needful structures. Similar authority would be exercised over the district not exceeding 10 miles square, which was to be chosen at the seat of government, the national capital, later named the District of Columbia. District of Columbia, not a state. And how that's treated is interesting. That whole situation is very interesting. Why can't we put Washington just in a state? Put it within one of the states. Why is it within a district of Columbia? And why did that district not have any representatives? And the people couldn't vote. What? What? Can they vote now? I don't know. You tell me. Look it up. Other important miscellaneous powers included the right to define and punish treason, to admit new states into the Union, which was huge at the time, to guarantee every state a Republican form of government, and to lay down the rules of amending the Constitution, Chapter 44. Fifth classification of powers consisted of certain restrictions imposed on the authority of the states. No state was to enter into any treaty, alliance, confederation, or coin money issues. This is the states used to do this under the Articles of Confederation. They used to have, and I collected when I was a collector. I used to collect money and all this old dead money, no longer of any worth, right? You'd see all these bills and coins from different states. Are really weird. Go online and see it. And I used to collect these. And I used to wonder why, I used to be able to buy a whole bunch of $5, $50, $10, $20, $100 bills for just a few bucks. I go, wow, this money is really cheap. Of course, couldn't use it. It's no longer valid, right? Coin money, issue bills, credit, passing a law, and impairing the obligation of contracts, or grant any title of nobility. No state, without the consent of the Congress, was to lay any imposts or duties on foreign imports and exports, or lay any duty on tonnage, or keep troops. See, it just streamlines everything. And it's so much easier to control. It's so much easier to operate, right? If we're all doing it in a unified way. And I know the current administration, other administrations say we need to be unified. That, you can have differing of opinions. That's why I have different parties, right? But you need to be unified in some of the most important ways, right? Such as commerce and defense and so forth, the stuff that they're talking about here, right? A sixth classification consisted of several powers and provisions designed to give effect to all the rest. One such provision gave the national government the power to make all laws deemed necessary and proper for carrying into execution all its other powers. No part of the proposed Constitution, Madison observed, was being assailed with more intemperance by anti-federalists who objected to the blanket phrase necessary and proper. They wanted specifications, which is good. That was impossible, Madison replied. Maybe not. At the Constitutional Convention, attempted to specify the particular powers necessary for implementing the Constitution. That would involve a complete digest of laws on every subject to which the Constitution relates. All right, you don't have to do that, James. Just kind of give us a general outline. But, that's how he was thinking. That's how it goes. Taking higher ground, Madison declared, no axiom is more clearly established in law or in reason than that which, wherever the end is required, the means are authorized. Wherever a general power to do a thing is given, every particular power necessary for doing it is included. Another restriction on the states was salutary. As the measures adopted and the treaties signed by the national government were to be the supreme law of the land, the law was to be binding on all state judges, no matter what the Constitution or laws or any state might be. of any state might be. Also, the law requiring all federal officials to take an oath to support the Constitution was to be extended to include state officers, all members of legislation. State officials would be essential to giving effect to the federal Constitution. Election of president of the United States Senate would depend in all cases upon state legislatures. 45, the powers of the national government be in chapter 45, would the powers of the national government be dangerous to the authority of the states? Critics said they would. That's a problem. That's a concern. Madison said not. Of course not. Under the Constitution, the states would retain a very extensive portion of active sovereignty. So there you go. Boom, bingo, bang, boom, boom. Hit it. Hit it. That's it. That's what we want, right? And that's why when you think about the states, you think about the people. The states are supreme. The people reside within the states, right? More specifically than at the federal level. Not systemically, but specifically within the states or within a particular state, right? Without the intervention of state legislatures, the president could not be elected. There you go. United States Senate would be elected absolutely and exclusively by the state legislatures. There you go. The House of Representatives, though elected by the people, would be chosen very much under the influence of those men who had risen to become members of the state legislatures, right? So it's all at the state level. We're sending people to Washington, but we're sending, depending on your state, we're sending people to Washington, representatives and senators, who are state supported first and foremost, right? We support them wholly and fully, and now we send you to Washington to do our bidding and to hopefully work well with other representatives and senators to do the general bidding of the people, right? National government would employ far fewer persons than the state governments in the aggregate or the collective, right? Consequently, the personal influence of national employees would be less than that of state employees, who would be closer to the people. There you go. Right? National employees, their influences would be less than the state employees who are closer to the people. Right? States, people are sovereign, states are sovereign, I guess you can say, right? The powers to be delegated to the national government were few and defined, while those retained by the states were numerous and indefinite. People often think that the president's going to go into office and start doing things that all the states have to do, right? No. The powers be delegated to the national government were few and defined. This is the stuff you need to know. While those retained by the states were numerous and indefinite. So the people have the power. The people are sovereign, not your president, not the monarch, not the king. That's one thing George Washington didn't want to be called. I don't want to be called king. I think that was a suggestion. You know, they didn't have a name initially, at least, a name picked right off the bat for the executive president. You know, and some suggested king. I swear, if I remember correctly. And that's like, oh no, 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 my friends. Wasn't King George III the guy that fought us tooth and nail, and who we got our independence from? Wasn't he king? Yeah, I don't like that title. The operations of the national government would be most extensive in times of war and danger. So again, I said that in commandeering an army or an armed force to go overseas, it has to come through the Senate, through the House, through the Senate. But operations of the national government would be most extensive. So, you know, 9/11, when we were attacked, did George Bush go through Congress to get the troops authorized to go overseas? No, that was kind of an emergency situation. Some people think, oh, that's against the Constitution. He can't do that. Again, you've got to know. Let me say it again. The operations of the national government would be most extensive in times of war and danger. Do you see what I'm saying? And who's the head of the national government? Who's the head of our government? The executive. Sometimes executive privilege in times of war and danger take precedence over the laws and procedures when things are not as dangerous or as contentious. Does that make sense? Let this sink in. This is called learning. Those of the states in times of peace and security. The changes proposed in the Constitution consisted much less in the addition of new powers to the Union than the invigoration of its original powers. Invigoration making more strong, more vigorous, hardy, strong, right? The regulation of interstate commerce was new power, to be sure, but few seem to object to that. Chapter 46, the author next asks whether the national government or the state governments would have the advantage in gaining the support of the people. The state governments would be, he argued for that, they would take care of the more domestic and personal interests of the people. Greater number of individuals could expect to rise to office in state governments to enjoy the salaries and emoluments thereof. Look that word up. It's got to do with money. Emoluments. People love words, big words, especially if you're trying to act smart or be smart or look smart. If the national government ever became disposed to extend its power beyond duty limits and raise the standing army to carry out its designs, that army in relation to the total population could not exceed 30,000 men. On the other hand, the combined militia of the states would total some 50,000 men, and the American militiamen had proved that they could do by defeating British regulars. Oh, I'm sorry, had proved what they could do by defeating British regulars during the Revolution. There you go, right? The states would have nothing to fear if they joined the Union. There was no danger of state governments being annihilated. In the final analysis, in this series of essays, Madison was clear in arguments that the new national government should have unlimited power in raising military forces for self-defense and levying taxes. Here's another list, right? The wherewithal. We need to have the wherewithal to do these things. Borrowing money, dealing with foreign nations, regulating interstate commerce, Indian trade, setting up uniform rules and renaturalization, bankruptcy, establishing post offices, post roads, other improvements, in support of the provision that the new government should have the exclusive right to legislate for the national capital district, not yet designated. Madison declared that if it were otherwise, the public authority might be insulted and its proceedings be interrupted with impunity. Harsh. Look that word up. Anytime you don't know a word, look it up. As things have turned out, I'm not going to just be your constant dictionary. As things have turned out, this provision was not a wise one. The residents of Washington, D.C. were deprived of the right to vote. Who said that? Who'd have think it? Who'd have thunk it? Even for municipal officers. Wow. That's cray. What's going on there? Congress still legislates for the city, and as Congress directs its attention to national affairs, it has little time or disposition to deal with local affairs. That might be the reason. Madison's defense of the Constitutional Convention's uninstructed action in scrapping the Articles of Confederation and drafting a whole new constitution was, to say the least, rather slippery, sophisticated, sophistical, very sophomoric. Look that one up. Quite at variance with the legal doctrine he had been preaching. All right. That's it. So next time, I tell you, man, there's a lot here. There is a lot here. We're about halfway through, right? So then you've got the structures of the new government. You've got the House, you've got the Senate, you got the executive, you got the judiciary. And that's the last bit of it. And then the conclusions, right? So we'll hit this one up next time and maybe get into the house. Try to do two sections at a time. All right. So for now, that's it. Have a good one. Take care.